My beloved, when life doesn't make sense, what do we do? How do we respond when God's plan seems confusing, or when everything feels like it's falling apart? These are pivotal questions every believer faces. When Jesus prepared to wash Peter's feet in John 13 verse 7, Peter resisted, saying, "No, Lord, you'll never wash my feet." Jesus gently responded, "You don't understand now what I am doing, but someday you will." That's often how God works in our lives. We're faced with circumstances that don't add up, plans that seem out of place, and paths that feel like detours. Yet God doesn't pause his plans until we fully grasp them. He calls us to trust him, especially when understanding eludes us. Imagine hitchhiking east, and Jesus stops to pick you up but heads west instead. You might not know the destination, but you trust the driver. That's faith, not needing to know the final stop, but trusting the one who is leading. Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 6 puts it beautifully, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths." Trusting when life feels chaotic. God's ways are infinitely higher than ours. As Isaiah 55 verses 8 to 9 reminds us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways and my thoughts than your thoughts." Sometimes, we're like a bird staring at a human building a birdhouse, completely incapable of understanding the builder's intentions. Similarly, we often fail to comprehend God's infinite perspective. Just because it doesn't make sense to us now doesn't mean it won't make sense later, or that it lacks purpose altogether. We may cry, plead, and ask God for clarity, but his ultimate response may simply be, "Trust me." Not understanding is no excuse for disobedience. Faith isn't about having all the answers, it's about obeying even when the path is unclear. When obedience feels hard. Many of us want God to reveal the entire picture before we take the first step. We hesitate, thinking, "God, this doesn't make sense. I need to see where this leads before I move." But faith doesn't work like that. It's trusting God enough to take step one, even when the rest of the road is hidden. Think of Abraham, who was called to leave everything familiar without knowing his destination. Or Peter, who stepped out of the boat onto the water at Jesus' command, not knowing how he would walk. These acts of faith weren't logical, they were acts of trust. If you're waiting for life to make sense before you move forward, you're missing what God wants to do in your life. His higher ways often require us to relinquish control and abandon the need to understand everything. Embracing the mystery of God. The truth is, we won't always understand God's ways on this side of eternity. Solomon acknowledged this in Ecclesiastes 8 verse 17, "No one can comprehend what goes on under the sun. Despite all their efforts to search it out, no one can discover its meaning." Even if the wise claim they know, they cannot really comprehend it. This is not a cop-out, it's a recognition of God's sovereignty. We can't force eternal plans to fit into our temporal minds. J.B. Phillips put it perfectly, "If God were small enough to figure out, he wouldn't be big enough to worship." When life feels unfair, when prayers go unanswered, loved ones pass away, or injustice prevails, it's easy to question God's goodness. But we must cling to the truth of his character. Psalm 100 verse 5 declares, "The Lord is good, his mercy is everlasting, and his truth endures to all generations." God is always good, even when life isn't. Faith through the storm. Faith is holding on to God's promises when life crumbles. Think of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, praying fervently for the cup of suffering to pass from him. The Father's answer was no. Even Jesus, in his humanity, faced unanswered prayers. Yet he surrendered, "Not my will, but yours be done." Being a Christian doesn't exempt us from pain. In fact, we often face trials that test us deeply. But the difference is this, we are never alone. Jesus walks with us, providing strength and hope. While the world clings to sinking sand, we anchor ourselves to the rock. A call to persevere. When life doesn't make sense, we have a choice, to grow bitter and give up, or to press on, trusting God's purpose even in the pain. Don't let betrayal, failure, or loss define your story. God's plans are greater than your setbacks. You may not understand today, but as Jesus promised Peter, someday you will. In the meantime, trust and obey. God is in control, even when life feels out of control. Keep running the race, holding on to the one who sees the beginning, the middle, and the end. When you don't know what to do, trust. When it doesn't make sense, obey. And when life feels like it's falling apart, remember that God is still holding it together.